If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
Our chat today is again with Kerry Thomas. Now, Kerry's given us a series of herd dynamic profiling. And if you're not sure what herd dynamic profiling is, because I wasn't either, go back and listen to Kerry's first episode. Really brilliant, he's done a lot of research into horses and their psychological research and the herd dynamics and the equine communication and, going through, he does a lot of racing, but all equine disciplines. So secrets to motivating equine athletes. If you like that and you want to find out more about your horses, your personality, if you're buying horses, if you're breeding horses, I think it's just a really, really interesting topic. Anyway, today we're going to look about emotional stress and how it affects physical performance. And I sort of, a lot of the topics he says, it makes so much sense because we talk about human athletes and their emotions and that affecting performance. We don't consider the horses, and of course it's very important. But before we get started, I'd just like to remind you about the mission at International Horse College, which is to provide the welfare of horses around the world through the safe education of riders, handlers and trainers. I should say to improve the welfare of horses around the world through the safe education of riders, handlers and trainers. Have a look at the wide variety of equine courses on internationalhorsecollege.com, registered training organisation 31352. Now, Kerry, are you there today?
I am, and thanks for having me again.
Oh, thanks for coming on, Kerry. I think this is an interesting topic that no one else seems to be talking about. And I know that you founded, THT Bloodstock. We want to get into this herd dynamic profiling. Tell us about, because as I said, we think about it with human performance. It's something that's going to have influence with horses. The stress and influence on horse athletes, equine athletes, that's your primary consideration. Is that right? Or I should say among your primary considerations.
Right. But certainly one of the most important factors and considerations that we've had, and I think that you really should have when you're evaluating horses and considering horses, because any athlete that can be affected by their emotions can have their potential affected, by proxy, and it's very, very important to understand, how your horse is dealing with stress and how that's affecting them. So it's very important. I mean, it's, human athletes, and whether you're a human athlete or a horse athlete or you're a human combination athlete, your emotional stress can have a great impact on your ability.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure. Now, when you go out, because you're doing research, and you've been doing research for quite a few years. How many years is it, Kerry?
I cut my teeth. I'll just say I'm going to age myself here, but I cut my teeth a long time ago. Let's just say that. A long time ago. I've been focused on this for a better part of, 20 years.
Yeah. You go out and you study horses in their natural environment, in your field studies. Do horses in this environment share stress collectively, or is it like entirely individual experience for the horses?
The interesting thing about horses in the natural environment is as a herd animal, they come equipped with some naturally occurring codependencies. They kind of fit together like a fabric, like a chain link fence, and they're able to share many things, and part of that, what they share collectively, is stress. And if one horse is experiencing some form of stress, the horse to shoulder the load if they can't figure it out for themselves. And this is by nature helps the herd survive. It helps the individual survive within the herd atmosphere. So it's very collective, and it's very natural for horses to, if you will, offload some of this emotional stress that they experience in the environment, one to the other.
So there's got to be a difference then between stress that's collectively distributed. It's got to be different to that's individually processed. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, stress that's collectively distributed is very different because again, you go back to shouldering a load with the other horses, and stress that affects the horse individually. You're going to isolate that horse, and you can cause a lot of anxiety and things of that nature. But collectively, it's much more easy for horses, even little horses on the totem pole, to get through danger and get through high stress situations as a herd when they can share this collective stress. It's very, very important to keep that in mind, because it affects a whole herd structure, and it affects herd movement. So if you have a high level horse or a low level horse, they can both be absorbed by the herd environment in a safe manner, and it helps keep them safe. It helps keep them safe from predators and from other dangers of the environment.
So I know you work with different horses in different disciplines. So do the different disciplines themselves manifest different types of emotional stress? Does that change from like a show jumper to a racehorse to a dressage horse to an endurance horse? How does that change, or does it change?
It does change for sure. And I kind of look at it in two different ways. I look at there's performance stress and there's competitive stress. And I kind of separate those two things, because each discipline, if you will, presents a different form of emotional stresses because of the demands of that discipline.
Okay, so if we think of performance stress, what's some of the basic characteristics then of the performance stress? How can we, as horse owners, riders, competitors, how can we recognise that the horse has got performance stress?
Performance stress, to me, from how I identify it, is anything the horse is doing as a singular thing. Like it's not competing with other horses. It's competing. It's a singular task. They're being coached and trained to jump. They're going against the clock. They're doing maneuvers, and performance stresses are all associated with a singular type of thing that the horse has to learn, and they can adapt very well, through repetition to these, because they assimilate so well for the most part. And so performance stresses can be accomplished and managed easier than competitive stresses. But for performance stresses are basically, if you think of anything the horse is doing as an individual, by themselves and their rider, of course, but as an individual, separated from other horses. And that is performing. They are performing a task, and they have only themselves and the environment to worry about, and how they themselves are going through the environment. That's performance, so that's how I separate performance stress from the other parts.
So what's the competitive stress then? Is that stemming from the environment that might involve more than one horse?
Yeah, once the transition from performance to competition kicks in, any number can bombard the horse, because now, competitive stress is the competition against other horses, one or more horses. And we look at this in racing, especially. There's a big difference between horses. I'll just use thoroughbreds as an example. Let's just say you're looking at a 2-year-old training, a breeze up sale, and this horse has been taught and coached to perform this task. And that's not always. They may perform that task very, very well. They can learn to go through the hoops and do what they need to do to have a fast speed and look pretty good doing it. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have the ability to handle competitive stress. And competitive stress is, now you're not just worrying about what you're doing, you're worrying about what you're doing in relation to what other horses are also doing. And rapid changes, oftentimes you're in a crowd over, a distance, and there's a lot of chaos going on. And so competitive stress is different in its plurality. There's a lot of different things, a cacophony, if you will, of stimulus bombarding the horse. And that's a whole different ballgame. And you can take a horse that can perform extremely well, and they can kind of shy and kind of melt into oblivion when it comes to has to be going into competition. So it is a big, big difference.
All right. So this, horses managing stress. Does like time, duration, is that going to change, or does it have any role at all in how the horse manages stress?
Yeah, it does actually. Time/duration is a major factor, because if you think about stress, with the horse, I always kind of liken it to, you have a balloon, and stress is air going into that balloon. And sometimes that stress builds up, and the pressure will kind of overcome your performance, and it needs to be released in some manner. And the longer you're asked to do something, the more stress can build up. If you're not processing stress properly, it is going to build up over time, and it's going to compromise competitive. So time has a big effect on performance as well as competition, because the duration that it can build up inside. If you can't deal with it, for example, I would say if you expect your horse to, I don't know, say run a mile and finish the race at a mile, well, you want to make sure that the psychology can go further than that, and you want to make sure the psyche can handle the time it takes to achieve that and the speed you need a horse to, plus extra, because you don't want to run out of the emotional stamina and your mental stamina. And if you're show jumping or if you're dressaging, you got to figure how much time of focus and concentration is my horse capable of performing this task. Because you may do really well for, I don't know, just throw a number out there, 35 to 40 seconds to a minute. And when you get beyond that, this is when, if emotional stress is not being processed properly, the time will begin to be your end. And it will have a big effect on the horse reaching their potential. Or, you hit a training plateau. You're good for a little while, but you can handle it, past down to a certain point. And a part of the reason can certainly be because of the emotional stress that's building up inside the horse.
That certainly makes sense. You research quite a lot, you write quite a lot. Your recent paper, you've described emotional stress as an ultimate chameleon. Breaking it down during the evaluation process, how do you do that?
I look at it in three different ways. I break it into stress, the emotional stress that's coming from the physical horse, be it some sort of injury or some kind of strain, something like that. That's one type of stress. The other type of stress we're looking for is the environment. Things that are happening in the environment, is that affecting the horse, emotionally? Is the horse being stressed out by different things that are going on? How well is it interpreting and processing the environment that it's in, whether it's moving or standing still? And then the other part of this is a very kind of a ghostly part of stress, and that is what I term associative stress. And this is stress that comes from something that happened to the horse or an experience that's not in the immediate environment, but something that is associated with it. So it could be something, you could have a 2-year-old horse that we're evaluating, and, I hear often that the horse sometimes, reacts to ghosts. Well, it's not reacting to ghosts. It is reacting to maybe ghostly memories of something that happened to the horse. So these are very deep-set types of stresses inside the horse that they're reacting to, with the associative area. So those three are really the key things that we begin to look for, or are there any signs of these things taking place?
Okay. Now, how important is it then to determine how a particular horse is dealing with the stresses they experience?
It's actually very important, because how a horse is dealing with stress is extremely influential on their ability to reach their potential. There's a big difference in preparation and execution. You can be prepared to the ITs and think you're ready, or think you have your horse ready, but when it comes to execution, that sometimes that pressure of the reality of what's going on, a lot of horses have a difficulty with that. And so it's very, very important to identify these factors, because you need to know how is your horse or your prospect. Preferably, you get this information before you invest in your horse. How is the horse handling this, and how is it affecting them? I mean, stress is going to be there. There's stress is something that any living thing is going to deal with to some degree. It's brilliant how any of us manage it, deal with it, and how we reflect it, and how it affects us. So, it's very important to know, is your horse, affecting their environment, or are they being affected by their environment? So that's a big difference, because when push comes to shove, and especially in competition, if you're competing against your peers, you want to know which way this tendency is going to be under the duration and the stress. And if you're a horse that's being asked to perform, tasks, you're going over jumps against the clock, you're in dressage, you're going cross country, you're doing some eventing, you need to know how your horse is going to handle the different types of stresses that they're going to encounter.
Yeah, well, that certainly makes sense, that's for sure. And I talk about horse owners, I talk about our listeners are horse owners or people who are having regular dealings with horses, but I actually get emails from people saying, I'm retired, I used to have a farm, I used to have a lot of horses, but, I'm a bit old now, but I really enjoy listening to the podcasts. And other people who don't currently have anything to do with horses, not in their regular daily lives, but have had in the past and want to in the future, so they enjoy listening to the podcast. But if I just think that generally as horse owners or people with an interest of horses, sometimes we find ourselves dealing with a horse that's got vices, right? Especially if they're stalled or stabled or confined. Are these vices an expression of emotional stress? How do you deal with that? What's your thoughts on that?
To me, I always look at vices as something that's really reflective of a horse living in our domesticated environment. Because the horse does a wonderful job of assimilation. They adapt very well, and we can take that for granted. We can take what we think is a simple-minded horse for granted, when in reality there could be a lot of anxieties building up inside the horse, and they're good with us. When left to their own devices in the stall, you may see all kinds of interesting erratic behaviors that look to be, like what's this horse doing? And in my opinion, a large majority, if not all, of these physical expressions and these vices, whether it's cribbing, whether it's stall walking, to various degrees, is coming from the psychology. They're trying to find harmony, where they trying to express themselves and trying to find harmony, trying to sucker the emotional gap, if you will, that they have in there. And the bottom line is, not all. If I look at it this way, the vices and stress is not going to be erased, and anxiety is not going to be erased, and it is our responsibility as horse caregivers and horse owners and as human beings, caring for these horses, to provide for them everything that they need, not just the physical standpoint, but from the emotional standpoint. And for me, these vices are, you kind of have to pick your poison. And my motto is, if it's not getting in the horse's way for what you're asking them to do, and don't put it in your way. Sometimes you have to straight up balance, because I chew my fingernails sometimes, and so I guess that's how I soothe myself if I'm having a little bit of anxiety. Sometimes you just kind of have to pick your poison and say, well, all right, I'll let you. I don't like to see you stall walking, but maybe you're doing. If I can't figure out the real reason why you're doing it, putting a Band-Aid on something is not going to help. It's going to make things worse. So, vices, I feel, are deeply rooted in the psychology, and let you drill in deep to kind of get to the root of the problem. Sometimes you can just find yourself fighting an uphill battle and trying to make them stop it.
Yeah. Everything you do, I'm sort of sometimes thinking, well, that makes sense, and comparing it to humans, because there's so much research done with humans. And as far as I know, you're the only one that's doing such in-depth research with horses. But when we think, about human health, physical health, we often hear in our world that emotional wellness helps lead to physical health and well-being, or physical health and healing. How impactful then can emotional stress be on the physical horse?
It's very influential. My saying is, emotional stress and physical health are the peas and carrots of athletic longevity, and well-being. Because if it can affect, the operating system, it's going to affect the machine. And so, it's a big difference between a horse that has natural fluency and physical fluency. I always say, too, if you want a supple horse, you need a supple mind. The two things work very together. And if you have emotional stress and you have anxiety, and then you're asking the horse to do physical tasks, and they're not going to be moving freely. There's going to be some stiffness. There's going to be a physical attrition coming from that psyche. So it's very, very important to physical health and physical well-being. And for a horse, even during convalescence, it's very important to have emotional well-being to give yourself a better chance to physically heal.
Yeah, it all makes sense. I mean, clearly there's a great deal of depth in this topic. If you were just going to summarise your thoughts regarding the influence that emotional stress can have, what would you say there, just as a summary?
I always say, really, the bottom line is, emotional stress is so powerful on everything that is the horse in their daily lives, in their training, in their actual performing or their actual competition. It's just so important to not overlook the influence that this has and that this is going to have. I just think, you're looking at horses are driven, by emotion. And for me, true horsemanship is really an act of recognizing natural instinct and emotionally connecting to that. To me, that's what it's all about. And it's because horsemanship is not something you see; it's something you feel. And to look at a horse, look at a prospect, and to consider your horse that you're either ready to buy or that you're dealing with every day or you're trying to train every day. The psychology runs the machine, and emotions are all part of that. That's part of that, as we said in our last show, the jigsaw puzzle, of the psyche that operates the machine. So, in summary, it's one of the most important factors that has a great influence on a horse's ability to reach their full potential, and you really should be at the primary focus. Because another thing I like to always point out to clients that we always do, when we're looking at horses, is that you always want to keep in mind that you should cross-reference, cross-check the psychological strengths and weaknesses with the physical strengths and weaknesses, in the physical conformation, because what areas are weak and strong or affect the opposing areas in the physical horse. So these are all things that play such an important role.
Kerry, we want to talk about how to get in touch, which is always, of course, on your contact details, but we'll talk about that. I just wanted to beforehand, the Kentucky Derby's coming up, isn't it? And you analyse some horses within that, because you've been doing it for quite a few years, just to analyse those horses, just determining stress management. Just quickly, just tell us a little bit about the stress management, how that's a key factor in and the horses that you're profiling leading into the Kentucky Derby.
This, like I said, this is going to be our 10th year evaluating the horses for the Kentucky Derby. And, we do this through video primarily and evaluating performances in the horses' previous races that we have available. And, one of the most important things that we're looking for in identifying is how are these horses, handling the stress from in their races, and breaking this down into different points of the races. How are they handling the competitive nature of the other horses? So it tells you a really big picture of the probability of success over what our Kentucky Derby here is a mile court. And they always say the fastest 2 minutes. They always talk about the fastest 2 minutes. But we're looking for horses, and when we're picking out the hierarchy of what we perceive to be the top horses and how they're going to finish, and we've done a very good job over the last 9 years of doing that. I'm looking for basically mental stamina, because a versatile mind. Versatility is psychological. So and adaptability is psychological, and things that we talk about like grit and heart and all those things. That's not a physical trait. That is a psychological trait. And so how that manifests is all hinged upon how well these horses are handling the stresses of the environment in the moment, and how long they can go before their balloon gets too full and they start to break down.
Okay. Kerry, clearly we need to get you back and talk a bit more about the herd dynamic profiling, but if people would like to contact you, and those details will be on horsechats.com, you can search for Kerry, probably the easiest, or search for Thomas. But Kerry, if they want to contact you direct, what's the best way? Is it to go to thtbloodstock.com?
Yeah, they have our website, thtbloodstock.com, and you can find me on Twitter, at Thomas Herding, and also we have a company Facebook page, and you can find me on Facebook as well, all through the social media. Yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions or thoughts or something going on with your horse, and Hey, thanks for having me on again, Glenys. I really do appreciate it.
Not a problem, Kerry, and appreciate your time coming on and giving us your expertise about this. So hopefully we'll catch up again soon with some more information about herd dynamic profiling. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government-accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.